Thanks for making the time to join us. I know for some of you it is very early or very late or squeezed in between different meetings, but we thought it'd be a good idea to hold something more in the APEC region time zone. So I'm Laura Jerry. I'm the chair of the New Zealand chapter of the ISRM, and I'll be hosting today's second Ask the Expert session. The ISRM exists to strengthen resilience profession globally, not just through standards or credentials, but by building community, sharing practical learning and lifting capability where it matters, and those real strategic risk decisions when we're under pressure. These Ask the Expert session format is deliberately different from your typical webinar. It's a conversation. You'll hear from our guest Chris, and we'll ask some prompting questions to get things moving, and then we'll open the floor up to you. Use that chat function throughout. Use it to ask questions, challenge assumptions, share what's worked and what hasn't. If you're early on in your career, you're especially welcome here. There's no basic question. This is the space to ask away. If you're thinking it, I guarantee you somebody else is too. And if you're more experienced, we're counting on you to share the wisdom without the jargon through the chat and through the questions you're creating. Today, we're joined by Christine F. Miller. Chris is an all-hands-on resilience leader with real-world experience across emergency management, crisis centres, pandemic preparedness, risk business continuity, and recovery. Chris brings the kind of insight you only get from being deep in the work, not by watching from the sidelines. What we're aiming for today is simple. We want you to walk away with some practical insights that you can use, those honest lessons from real events about what didn't go to plan, and the few good challenges to our assumptions. Ideally, we want everyone to walk away with one action they can take away into this week to strengthen their capability, whether within their organisation or within themselves. So at the end of the session, I'll ask you to drop that into one action into that chat, so we've got a shared list. But a couple of quick ground rules. We're looking to keep it respectful, curious, and real. We're looking to challenge ideas and not people. So, all right, Chris, thank you for being here and sharing your expert judgment with us. Might just start with a question that I've got pre-prepared, but please, in the chat, drop out any questions. If the conversation with Chris is sparking any ideas for you, add those into the chat as well. So, Chris, I know from your career and things that you post on LinkedIn and that you write about, that you've seen a lot of exercises over the years. I'm curious about your experience around what is the difference between an exercise that genuinely changes behaviour and one that produces just a nice report.
Interesting. That should be the kick-off question, Laura, because I'm busy writing a paper with colleagues about exactly that problem. That I've got a recurrent slide of a nice bookshelf and saying, I'm sick and tired of seeing a nice report on the bookshelf. So I've become very much involved with lessons management to take us to that next step. And colleagues and I are writing a paper now to possibly get published in the Lancet or the British Medical Journal or one of those big international publications, because we're sick and tired of seeing the World Health Organization exercise model saying it stops at the report.
Yeah, the lessons learned when they're written in a report.
I don't know how many times I feel like the little grey rhino that Michelle Walker wrote about, stamping my little tootsies going, no, this isn't enough. You have to take it to that next level of accountability and have governance. Now, a lot of the recent work I've been doing in the health emergency sector, even in low and middle income countries like Timor-Leste and Eswatini, formerly the Swaziland, their health sectors have very strong risk and audit committees. And so I'm weaving all that back into that accountability model. So you get the proper governance and oversight so that our exercises just don't become a very nice decoration for the bookshelf, but that have ongoing courage and oversight by appropriate senior people who have the capacity to make things happen.
Yeah, I think that's one of the keys of how do you link into existing processes, because these exercises are really expensive events to produce, either by just dollar value or time of how are you showing that value of what this exercise actually made different tomorrow than just the report that sits on a binder on a shelf and hopefully somebody signs off as saying that it's true and correct. But thanks for that
Yeah,
insight.
and
I think it's something.
to give you a couple of real world examples, I went to Africa with the World Bank, spent a lot of time raving on about lessons management. Now we're publishing about it, but it's wonderful. It's even more exciting to actually see it happen. So, talking about how expensive these can be, the last exercise I was involved in Africa with facilitators from WHO, World Health Organization, Africa CDC, it had 350 participants for a
Yeah.
week. Now,
Mm.
none of those people are less than leaders in their field. Some of them were medical doctors. You know, we're talking about very scarce resources in a lower middle income country devoted to that exercise. They were also away from their capital city, Mbane. They're up in the bush in Pigs Peak and working with the South African border. So we're not talking about cheap. We're talking
Mm.
about a huge investment, not just financially, but in resources. And I'm happy to report there's some both big and small lessons that were learned. That
Mm.
particular
Yeah.
scenario was cholera, and we discovered that the first sort of port of call health post from the border did not have cholera test kits
Mm.
before the exercise, but they sure as hell did after the exercise. Now that may seem like a small win, but Jesus, if you've got cholera, that's really important. And to take that up to a bigger example, while I was there for the exercise, I was taken to a new forward base that had been funded by
Mm.
the World Bank and other donors because it was a 90-minute, even with lights and siren journey from Mbane, the capital city, to the South African border for their ambulances. But what has now happened with enough money and effort, they have got a forward base which reduces the business as usual transit time from to 30 minutes, lights and siren 15 to 20. Now, this may seem like, ho hum, but if you're really sick, you do not want to be waiting 90 minutes for your initial care. You'd be much
Mm.
happier to see that starting for you at 15 to 20 minutes. And so that will
Yeah.
make real differences. People's lives will be saved or their level of suffering will decrease. So sometimes you have a win in the lessons management space.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. Like, you do these exercises, you could have sat down as a group and thought these steps through and come up with these solutions. But would you actually get the political will and the buy-in to put them in place quickly? And exercise is a really great way of showing leadership, so what? So why do we need to do this? And you linked that back really nicely to it's going to make a huge difference to somebody who has cholera. And at the point of your exercise, the objective of your exercise is to actually get down to that granular so what detail. You can move things forward and build resilience in a way that would have taken 6 months or a year to do without that exercise in place.
Indeed, and I get very annoyed, particularly with politicians, and I've worked for a lot of them over the years, when they
Mm.
talk about lessons will be learned. Well, will they? I mean, lessons are not learned, they're identified until you make genuine changes that stick.
Mm.
And
Some
I've seen that too rarely.
nice point from David in the comment. The lessons learned is a folder which collects dust on a shelf that is never opened. It's just a trophy. Yeah, that definitely resonates, David. Thanks for adding that into the comments. And I think that leans on to my next question that I had for you, Chris. It's around early on in a crisis. Information tends to be messy, either in how we understand what that information actually means or actually getting it to the right people to have the right actions taken on that information. As you're thinking about preparedness and how you prepare people to respond, Do you have a way that you personally decide we know enough to act now versus what are we just guessing?
Yes, that's another good question, Laura, and certainly one that's becoming more and more of an issue because we're so bombarded with information. But is it the information we need to make the best
Yeah.
decision? And often I exercise quite senior people and I say, you are going to be making decisions with less information than you would like. You are
Mm.
going to feel very uncertain about it. I remember an exercise where I had a quite senior person was chairing the crisis or incident management team. At the end of the exercise, he called me into his office. Yes, my leader, I am here. Uh, and he shut the door and he said, it's not me. And I went, huh? Hmm?
Mm.
He said, no, no, look, I'm really good at business as usual. I usually receive briefs from my teams that have spent sometimes months, even possibly years, developing a topic and providing me with a recommendation to endorse or options for me to consider. It's all very well organised. It comes with costings usually and resource implications. I'm not really good in a crisis.
Mm.
But he said,
And
the good
sometimes
news
that's
is, sorry, go.
so one of the best outcomes, I think, of an exercise is you can get senior leaders to really understand what that stress and pressure is. Uh,
Mm,
because I think you can talk and hold a briefing, and the answer is, of course, I can deliver this. I'm a senior leader. I get paid X amount. My title is blah blah blah. Of course, I can work under stress and pressure of a crisis, but without actually showing what that stress and pressure is of a crisis, people assume they can step into it without really testing their own personal capability and how comfortable they are in that role where they don't have all the information.
mm. And following on to that story, as the story, as we had that discussion, and I thought it was very insightful of this quite senior leader to say, it's not me. But what he did come up with is my property manager. Now, lots of businesses I've worked in, for example, I'm working Cleanaway now, and we got more than 350 sites. Um, so that the property manager in lots of businesses I've worked with often has a sort of daily diet of crises. You know, what is it today? Which of my 350 sites has got a problem? Because in Australia, it's pretty unlikely that if you've got that kind of footprint, that one of those locations or more isn't experiencing a flood, a
You have
fire,
blood at one
something, a
edge
heat
and a
wave.
fire at the other.
Yeah, yeah, or some other annoying thing happening. So he made the point that his property manager was very agile and very suited to dealing with crisis situations because it was sort of his daily diet. So he might come into
Yeah,
work with sort of a to-do list and then, oh, what's today's crisis? So he has to, and I talk about that as business continuity elasticity. So you've got a sort of business as usual continuum, and then you've got elasticity where you can reach out within your existing resources and bring it into business as usual before you get to actually activating your business continuity plan. So he said, no, no, I want the property manager to be the chair of this thing because he's really good at that. And I will be the observer and I will write. So what we did was we wrote delegations into the business continuity plan. So when it was activated, that crisis manager, the property manager, had delegations equivalent to his manager, so he could sign off bigger checks and deploy more staff and do all sorts of things. But it was clear that that was the supported view of his manager, who would be happy to be in the room to convince
yeah,
any other senior managers that might question that decision.
yeah. Do you think, as we kind of look forward to, I suppose, the favourite of any resilience or business continuity professional of the VUCA world that we're steering into, are we going to have to teach leaders to be more agile in how they're making decisions? Is our business as usual going to have to be more based on decisions with less information?
Yes, I suspect that's the case, and I think some senior managers will find that at the very least unsettling, but they're
Mm,
growing into that too. I mean, we live in a social media world where we're bombarded with information, but is it the information we need to make the best decisions? And that's one of the real
mm,
questions. So I've been quite interested in some of the digital work we're seeing in emergency management. Mm. Once
mm,
upon a time, I was a leading student in geography and so on. So I've always been interested in mapping and digital
mm,
um, and now in Australia, our old flood and fire maps are complete nonsense. We need
yeah.
real time or as close as possible to real time because the
Mm,
environment's changed so much, as Andrew, I see here, has said. It isn't about climate change, it's climate has changed, and we need to
yeah.
accept that. And a lot of the
Mm,
historical disaster understandings are just not credible, not useful, and not
mm,
helpful when you're actually in the response phase. We need to get as close as we possibly can to real-time mapping.
mm,
And we're investing a lot of money in that. I guess you are in New Zealand too, but we're certainly doing it here to help
yeah.
managers make the best decisions they can quickly with the best information that we can get to them.
Mm. And that kind of leads into a question that David has added into the chat, and the rest of you on the call, if you want to add your questions, and we'll flip through them as we're talking and as the conversation flows. But David has asked, is flexing the BCP the same as resilience?
No, but I see business continuity as a platform to
Mm,
improve resilience. So a lot of the preparatory work we do in business continuity. So I see business continuity as two parts. One is trying to make your business as usual more resilient and less likely to fail,
mm,
as well as the other half, what the hell are you going to do if it does? So that it, business continuity for me is a pathway, a
yeah.
foundation to resilience. But there can be other things like security. If
Mm,
you get your security, both physical and cyber, and so it goes. There are many elements, many silos we need to break down to bring together
yeah.
to enhance resiliency. And at Cleanaway, my boss's title is Business Resiliency Manager, but we're actually
Mm.
working on business continuity. We're having an exercise in about 90 minutes' time. So a bit of
Hopefully
pressure
there's some
for us
lessons to
too.
be learned.
We'll
And I think
see.
that, yeah, echoing your point, I talk about business continuity and resilience being the umbrella term. Building resilience is the outcome you are working towards. You are either doing that by creating business continuity plans, which gives options of what is possible in a crisis or a disruption. But we all recognize that they will not be a plug and play for the exact environment you happen to be responding in. To your point about real time mapping of flooding and fire zones, you could have a business continuity plan that's based on those maps from a decade ago. And while that plan maybe has some good information in it, it is not going to be fit for purpose for the event that you're just faced with. So if your lens or your strategy is how do we build resilience, then those business continuity plans need to be flexible and adaptable in order to be able to achieve that. And I think from David
Exactly.
again, senior leaders need to be fed a list of risks and associated impacts which threaten the existence of the business, including the supply chain. This part is very close to my heart, with the supply chain resilience being something that I do quite a bit of thinking in, and how do we move away from an environment where the assessment of our suppliers' business continuity is more than what is their plan, what is their program for managing business continuity, to how do we really understand how our critical functions would click in with theirs in a disruption, and we can actually move forward with the supplier support. Are you doing a lot of thinking or work within that supply chain space, Chris?
Oh, yes, absolutely. because it's one of the big vulnerabilities in our business continuity plans is a lack of understanding of dependencies. And often we discover the dependencies when it's too late, when it's all gone catastrophically wrong. I remember many years ago, Qantas bravely turned up, their senior business continuity manager bravely turned up it'll be more than a decade ago, and said that their estimate of internal, so these are just domestic, not international flights for Qantas, was over 40,000 dependencies, 120 of which would stop the airline flying.
Yeah.
Now, it was interesting when she reported this to the board, their response was, we'll go out and have a chat to those 120 and help them, because Qantas was quite at ease with the investment that they'd made in their business continuity and their exercise and rah, rah, rah. But what they were concerned about is those third parties or beyond, because third parties is often an error. I've found supply chains buried as deep as 12 levels down. If you can't get those people robust, another colleague was telling me, who was a business continuity manager for a power station, he said, inside my fence, I'm confident about our status. But as soon as we go outside the fence into the supply chain space, well, anything can happen. And I've been during and since COVID doing a lot of work with the Global Supply Chain Council, which has 260,000 members or more, mostly in APAC, but in other regions too, where we've been looking very closely at supply chains. And for those of us who've been in this space for a while, there's an old joke that once upon a time we had warehouses and storerooms and so on, and we had product on site or readily available. Then we moved to just in time, and then almost in time, and now during COVID it was, as one of them put it rather colourfully, bloody lucky if you got it, mate.
Yeah, I think it's shifting that thinking, Philip, and using a posture of just in case. For business continuity to be valued, it needs to be the system that enables us to understand what is critical enough that we need to do the work to understand the supply chain, to understand the dependencies to that really deep level. Because as we saw in CrowdStrike, it's this miniature underlying architecture that has the oversized impact across our businesses. But we do need to narrow the field away from what was Qantas, the 140,000 suppliers or 120 suppliers that they could conceivably stop their business, narrowing that down so you're using the time where the biggest impact is going to be from understanding that dependency mapping instead of trying to boil the ocean and understand everything that's happening across your organisation.
Well, and to give you a personal example of many dependencies, when I worked for ACT Health looking after business continuity for a hospital, it was impossible to actually map the dependencies because there were so many. So I actually took a rather frightening approach, as some of my colleagues put it, to talk to them about what I called hospital killers. And I said, the question was, what will stop this hospital? And it was fascinating to hear what that list was. And after we carefully examined it, the first answer was water. Because as the head of emergency management at the hospital, emergency ward and so on, where you arrive in an ambulance, those kind of people, he said, look, and they had a very big car park, a big fancy concrete monstrous car park, as we called it. He said, I can do MASH in the car park because it had natural light and so on. But if you can't deliver me water, we're out of business because I can't maintain infection control without water. And then the next one was one that came as a bit of a surprise to some people, and quite relevant to my current employment, waste management.
Yeah.
Because at a hospital, if you can't get rid of clinical waste, and that contract was set up for 3 days, so it had to be collected by day 4, and that was designed around long weekends. You know, they call New Zealand and Australia the lands of the long weekend. Um, if you can't get that sorted, your hospital goes offline. If your
Mm,
clinical waste level increase to a point of danger, um, your hospital can no longer function. So
yeah.
it's fascinating. If it gets too hard to map the dependencies, because the other problem, once upon a time we used to have linear dependency mapping for supply chain. Now it's much more organic. I'm presenting clients with a much more organic model of supply chain mapping, which is
Yeah, and
quite
it sounds
difficult
like with
to
your hospital example, you could spend all your time going through very granular detail with everybody in the hospital about what they consider critical and the dependencies they have to be able to deliver that. Or you can cut that middleman out completely and ask the brave question, what's actually going to make us stand still and dead in the water? And if we solve those resilience problems, it has an oversized impact across many critical functions, not just the one that we managed to tease out in this one workshop. Some great questions coming into the chat. And Shalanda, I might need some help with the question with the GIT, or is it JIT model? Would there need
get
to be a
just in time.
partnership with supply chain? Oh, just great. Would there need to be partnership with the supply chain to help them boost their resilience?
Absolutely, and that was the approach that Qantas board
Mm,
took, was let us go out and partner with these 120 that will stop the airlines, because we
mm,
have a team of 6 excellent top of the range business continuity managers like yourself and Pete for Air New Zealand. So they sent their team out to work with those critical
mm,
suppliers and bring their business continuity, their resiliency up to a hopefully higher standard, or, so that they were less likely
yeah,
to fail. Or if they failed, there were good communication plans and so on, so that it would be known quickly, so Qantas could
yeah.
act and possibly have alternate supply contracts or whatever it was that they might have in place as resiliency measures to reduce that vulnerability.
I think the suppose lump under the carpet of all of this is it's not just your suppliers, it's the critical infrastructure that you rely on. In order for that hospital to continue to be able to have water delivered to them, they're not just relying on their water provider, they're relying on the critical infrastructure that is underneath it. Do you see businesses and business continuity professionals and resilience professionals having a role in influencing infrastructure resilience and how systems as a whole understand their resilience capability?
Oh, yes. I've spent quite a bit of time. We have in Australia a thing called TISN, which is a Trusted
Mm,
Information Sharing Network. And SIAC, I've attended SIAC meetings, which is where we bring together these infrastructure providers in power, water, telecommunications,
mm,
banking. I mean, the list is long and alarming. We actually bring them together because they have separate meetings as that sort of sector group, but SIAC actually brings them together and
mm,
that's fascinating. You look at things like back to water. You can't run a power station without water because you need the water to cool it. But
mm.
then you can't run the water supply without telecommunications now, because they don't have enough staff to sort of switch on the valves and whatever all that is. It
Yeah,
has to be done with Wi-Fi. So if you don't have telecommunications, you can't have water. So all of these integrated systems, but even worse, and again, I do stamp my little foot like the little rhino. Sorry, Michelle. Saying we are full of aging infrastructure.
yeah.
And you see that when some of the great accidents have occurred. Like I remember walking under the concrete bridges at Genoa Port in Italy and looking up at this big piece of concrete above us. And guess what? A big piece of it fell down on a railway line to make it even more exciting and killed over 30 people. And part of the problem was it was badly designed, but it was badly maintained. So
Yeah.
we are just writing ourselves a recipe for disaster with aging infrastructure and then wondering, oh, why did it fail? Oh, goodness me.
Maybe if we look at the exercise report and see the lessons learned from this one picture perfect report that never went anywhere, we'd probably find the exact thing that was needed in order to mitigate that risk. Another really great comment in here from David about resilience reminds me of someone sitting on the branch of a tree which flexes and flexes and flexes, and if it breaks, BC kicks in. Does that
Yeah,
resonate
and
with you, Chris?
that's why I talk about that continuum. So we've got a continuum of business continuity. Business as usual, everything's going smoothly, lovely. That elasticity, people like property managers, IT, security, work health and safety, HR,
Mm,
all those kind of enabling services in your business, they're all the time reaching out and bringing in lower level disruptions into
mm,
resolution. And then further up the continuum is where you start to activate the plan when you really hit a significant disruption that exceeds your natural elasticity. I mean, I
yeah.
often say to clients that your business is resilient, but we want to work with you to enhance that resiliency, to strengthen that resiliency, and move you further down the continuum of vulnerability. So you don't need your business continuity plan. It'd be perfect if we're only exercising our business continuity
Mm,
plans for possible scenarios rather
mm.
than switching them on when something's gone catastrophically wrong.
Yeah, I think that echoes a couple of conversations I've had recently where if you're thinking about what is your tolerance or what is the triggers for business continuity, and I always think about them regardless of what the scenario or the problem is that you're facing. Are the systems designed to resolve that problem overwhelmed? So you can have a higher level of resilience in your business on this particular scenario because you are inherently more resilient to it or you're designed for that particular scenario. So you're not going to need business continuity until a lot higher point in time. But there may be something that's quite out of left field that you haven't considered before, or there is a dependency that you haven't seen previously, and your level for needing that business continuity plan is going to be a lot more reduced. That level of resilience isn't a set point within any organization, nor is it set just once across the organization. There's going to be different levels of resilience and different requirements in order to be able to build that resilience. Makes this work a little
And
bit more
further,
nuanced and interesting.
and further, when you look at the new GPG, Good Practice Guide cycle, and it talks about embracing rather than
Mm,
embedding business continuity culture. Uh, I saw an example of that again when I was at ACT Health in the hospital. We'd done some pilot work with one of our wards, aged care and disability services, which was actually spread. Aged care was on one side, disability was on the other. And in the middle was an aisle corridor that took you from the concrete monster car park, as everyone called it, into the main hospital area to reception and so on, so that you could find your loved one and so on and so on. And there was a water leak that got across the corridor. Now,
mm,
um, that normally wouldn't be enough to trigger the business continuity plan, but because they'd been exercised and involved in developing their plan, when they had a problem like that, they got the plan out and they had, oh, yes,
mm,
yes, we do. Now, it wasn't enough to trigger an activation of the plan, but it was enough because they were so well attuned to business continuity by then to, okay, let's have a look at the checklist and see if we
mm,
covered everything off that we should have. And if it escalates to the point where that concrete monster car park egress into the hospital is impacted, then it definitely starts to become, do we need to put the flag up and say, Houston, we've got a problem. In
yeah.
this case, Canberra office, we've got a problem. Because if that walkway was impeded, then there could be all sorts of implications such as work health and safety. You don't want people slipping. That surface was actually quite slippery on its best day because it was painted concrete. So putting water on it. So we've got people coming to see a patient who might be joining the patient list, given the nature of that walkway. So
So we've got,
when you get your people embracing what you're trying to do in this space, they sometimes use their plans for lower level incidents, back to that continuum. But it also gives them good practice. And again, I've been stamping my foot at the World Health Organization. They only include incidents and exercises, not near misses. And I've seen with many that near misses can often be very instructive and help you
yeah.
prepare for the really bad day at the office.
Mm. Yeah, really good points, Chris. And I think it reminds me of I always say that if your resilience is your business continuity or crisis management system is working really well, it becomes a solution for many business problems. And this is leading into kind of Lynn's question, where there is, she asked, I'm curious about the human element in this. For example, any cultural differences that are posed barriers when dependencies are spread widely across the globe. Also, returning to the early example you gave of the person who faced crisis of some sort on a daily basis, is there a high burnout among crisis management, and what impact does that have for our community? And I think what you're saying, what I'm alluding to, is that we've seen when this works well, it gets relied on for a lot of business problems that may not necessarily be actually to the trigger or to the impact level of a crisis or a business continuity event, but it becomes seen as a way to get things solved quickly. And that tends to lead to that high level of burnout of these really expensive processes being used for smaller shaped problems and incidents. Have you seen that through your work or have any solutions for us?
Oh, I wish I had more solutions. Yes, indeed, it does happen. And certainly I've seen, I've only been in the emergency management business for 54 years, but part
Only.
of that has been careful protection of myself. So, for
Mm.
instance, when I was a police officer, some of my colleagues, again, I spent 7 years in highway patrol, so driving quickly up and down southeast Queensland roads, um, they would drive home at speed. And
Mm.
and I think, well, why? Because I used to use the drive home to decompress.
Mm.
So, and my first degree was in industrial and organisational psychology. I've got more than a double major in psychology. And when I first came into business continuity, I was almost apologetic because I didn't have an ITDR background. And in those days, 20 years ago, practically everybody did. And if you look at the
Mm.
fellows, the early fellows of the Business Continuity Institute, they've all got a big ITDR background. So, as I say, I was very apologetic. I said, oh, no, no, I'm a sort of inferior business continuity manager because I don't have that background. But of
Mm.
course, now the pendulum has really shifted towards human factors.
Yeah.
Increasingly, people are realizing that we have to think about psychological safety. We have to think about our people. We cannot assume that someone that's good at business as usual is going to be fantastic in a crisis. And this exercise we're doing in about 60 minutes time, 75 minutes time, who's counting, uh, we're intentionally putting them under time pressure because I
Mm.
want them to get to that. Now, we're setting them tasks that will take a lot more than 15 minutes, that's for sure, but we've only got 2 hours of their precious time. So I'm using that as part of the exercise environment. I want them to get used to making decisions under pressure with insufficient information because that'll actually mirror what happens in the real world
Mm.
when something's going catastrophically wrong.
And I think just to go back to Lynn's first question around here, the cultural differences that pose barriers when dependencies are spread widely across the globe. You have quite an international career where you've worked with the World Bank, and have you seen those that friction from that cultural diversity really hindering any crisis response or emergency response?
It's more remember, I said when I first came into emergency management, it was all very Anglo and all very
Mm.
male. But that's sort of changing, and we're seeing more leaders
Mm.
in that space who are women and come from different cultural backgrounds, which is a wonderful thing, because we know that diversity, I've given about several thousand Myers-Briggs indicated activities, and so I'm a great champion of diversity. And I know that for success in organisations, you must bring a range of views together. Something we're talking about in this exercise in a few minutes' time. It will be teamwork. Often,
Mm.
when I'm involved in business continuity, it's the bosses that write the plan. They go, no, 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 no. It's a team sport. You want to get as many people involved as possible because everyone will see it in a different way. And I remember sitting in the office of the CEO at the Torres Strait Regional Authority, right up at the very tip of Australia, almost into Papua New Guinea, and asking him about payroll. I was trying to explain to him, he'd never heard about business continuity until these two suits arrived from Canberra. And trying to explain to him what a time critical business process would be. So payroll is always a good example because strangely, people expect to be paid or they won't keep turning up. Now, of course, the CEO, he didn't know the details about his payroll. This is some years ago, but he knew that there was an accountant in Cairns and there was various digital media that got put into his safe relating to the payroll. So we invited in his payroll club. And she looked very nervous coming into the boss's office and with the suits from Canberra. Oh, goodness, what have I done wrong today? But when we spoke to her, we discovered she actually had a really good business recovery process for payroll. She had duplicate systems with the accountant in Cairns. When she went on holidays, she briefed another colleague and they do the
Yeah.
pay run before she left. He had all these good processes that had never been documented, which is why it was all in her head. She knew what to do. Why I often say you want the most expert people to write your business recovery procedures into your business continuity plan, or the least expert people to do it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you've got to be
And I think
thinking about who is the one that's going to be there at 4 o'clock in the morning when it's all going bad.
And I think also thinking you've got those really great practices within the payroll system. Can that be replicated when your data recovery? Or can that be the same processes and systems? Are they just as applicable for your annual leave entitlements or whatever other critical system you decide there is? I think we are really good as professionals at really narrowing down the scope to one particular thing. We're not so good at broadening the thinking about how that can also be replicated across different processes and different systems, and that same thinking replicated across the business. But really good points,
Mm.
Chris. I think that leads
And
into
sorry, I often see the business impact analysis is often burrowing into the weeds. So I'm
mm,
often encouraging people to roll it up. So, for instance, I've had an interesting discussion about reporting
mm,
now in the finance space and compliance space. The what you should be focusing on is reporting, but then breaking it down into monthly and annual and so on and so
yeah,
on. And looking at what I call rolling MTPDs, because, for
mm,
instance, payroll is a good example. In Australia, most people are paid fortnightly. So your critical time is the 3 days before you get paid. But
mm,
the days after, who cares? You got paid.
yeah,
So when things come in and out of criticality, which is not always well reflected in plans, so that it is
mm,
clear to the people making decisions, you've got a problem at this point, but that you've got some days when you can be worrying about some other problem.
yeah. I think there's a lot we can do with technology to be able to show what that flowing state of resilience is at a point in time versus a static plan that, again, like lessons learned, sits on in a binder and doesn't become a living live document. And I think we've got a comment here from David. I'm sitting with more women on the bench in the magistrates court who bring non-linear thinking during discussions before sentencing. increasing credibility of justice. Long may it continue. Thanks, David. That's a really good concept to hear. And it kind of leans into one of my questions for you, Chris, around we've seen diversity within the emergency management space and that diversity of thought within the emergency management space. Have you seen that conflict with a more traditional command and control space where the point of decisions where they were quick and there can be a bias towards diversity or getting more opinions on something is just going to slow the process down? Have you seen those two ideas come into conflict, and have you seen them be resolved?
Yes, too often. It's a very difficult space, and it's part of training your leaders. Now, some things, sometimes there'll be situations where you just have to make a decision. I remember one of those decisions when I was in the police. We had this woman that was, her vehicle was hit by a truck, and we had a whole lot of emergency services, not just the police, trying to extricate her from the vehicle.
Mm.
But it started to catch fire. And it got to the point where I actually had to order the emergency services off the vehicle and let her die.
Mm.
And they weren't happy about that. But these are scarce resources and one woman. So unfortunately, she died. We couldn't save her despite many great efforts to do so. But as a leader, I had to think hard about all the other people whose lives were being risked to save one person.
Mm. Yep, those decisions are not easy and they stick with you for a long time.
I'll die with that decision. But it was the best decision. And on reflection and on our debriefing, it was the only decision. If anything, I got criticised for not making it sooner,
Yeah.
not getting them off the vehicle sooner.
Mm. Hindsight is a really great thing. All right.
Yeah, it's very easy when you're making, sorry, it's very easy when you're making a
Yeah.
split-second decision. And
Yeah.
then you have months later where you're pulling it apart in the coroner's court or some other inquiry, and you've got hours and these armchair experts who've never had to make such decisions.
Yeah, it kind of leans into one of my main points around crisis management is the documentation is really important. That is what's going to support you when you're in those coroner reports or you're trying to justify why this decision was made. Documenting not just the key decision, but the context under which they were made under can make a huge difference about how somebody recalls why that decision was made. All right, I am conscious of the time. We've got about 10 minutes left. So I might just do a last minute call. If anyone's got any burning decisions for Chris into the chat, we'll come back to maybe one or two. And also, if you want to have a think about the topics that we talked about today, is there anything tangible that you're going to take away and change either in your own personal capability or how you're thinking about building resilience across your organisations? Chris, I might throw that back to you. Is there one key point that you would want people to take away as they're thinking about their own personal resilience or how they build resilience in organisations?
Preparedness. I think we persistently underinvest in preparedness. But just to take up a point that David's made in the chat about decision logging, yes, that's getting more and more sophisticated. I'm working with colleagues with Cognitus Global, where they've actually got AI features that help with the decision logging. But even before that, I train as part of good practice what I call administrative support team for your crisis and incident management team. And they're usually the executive assistants to some of the most senior people in the organisation because they're really good at taking minutes and so on. And I generally, in the real world, I have two of them. One doing the minutes in the room and logging the decisions so that there is evidence of what the hell they decided and maybe even a bit of why. But the other one takes their phones. I'm a bit of a Gestapo about that. Take their phones off them because and have short meetings. Because if you don't do that, they'll spend I just got to take this call
Yeah, you want to amp the
So
anxiety
it,
up in your exercise. Get them to push their phones and devices into the middle of the room. I've done that for an exercise
yeah,
where
yeah, it
the
is.
was designed around a complete network failure and them not being
So,
able to have the usual communication devices that they are used to having put a palpable amount of anxiety across the room.
and I reassure them that their messages will be taken, and they'll be able to call those people back after the brief meeting we will
Mm.
have, which I keep to 15 minutes or some short period. Sometimes make it stand up to really make them get to the point. But yeah, take their damn phones off them. Administrative support as an adjunct, and I actually exercise the administrative support team. I train them and I exercise them so that when the real deal comes, they are familiar with what to do, and that
Yeah.
really strengthens your decision logging.
Mm.
David, I think it was. But
Yeah.
if there's one word I want to leave you with, it's preparedness, because it's so underdone, it's underinvested, and we pay a terrible price for lack of preparedness.
No, completely agree.
Fair
And I
people.
think, Chris, to extend on that, there's the preparedness of your organization, the systems, the contact list, the understanding what's critical within your organization. And there's also personal preparedness. And we also undersell the importance of being personally prepared. And whether that's you have systems set up so you can answer your phone while you're driving, to the mental models that you use to understand how much stress and pressure you're under, that personal preparedness plays a role in here as well. I'm seeing coming
Well, and
into the yeah,
just to give you a
sorry.
couple of good examples of that, um, critical staff, you can't assume that they're endlessly available. Now, I was
Mm,
working on putting up Australian government measures on disaster assist following the Indian Ocean tsunami, which of course inconveniently occurred on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas.
mm,
Now, my web technician was also a bushfire captain, and because it was a sort of public service stand down, his nurse wife had taken up a whole lot of shifts at the hospital to help the
mm,
finances. So here he was trying to be in three places at once. He was
yeah.
trying to be helping me with the website stuff, putting up Australian government assistance measures. And then, by the way, we had a fire. He's the bushfire captain.
Mm,
And his wife, what are we going to do with the kids? Because she's got all these shifts at the hospital. Really, personal preparedness. But there's also some good stories. Hurricane Katrina, David Parsons talks about the CFO at a major power station who had hundreds of thousands of customers offline and a flooded car park at his power station and all sorts of problems going on. Had responsibility for an aging mother, and apparently he
mm,
was a very good and loyal son who took very good care of her. But of course, he's trying to be in two places at once. But their plan from Mississippi Power actually had some redeployable staff helping his mother. So every
mm,
day he'd phone up his mother and say, "Oh, how's it going?" And she'd say, "Oh, those nice young people, they've done a wonderful job cleaning my house out." And at the end of
mm,
it, in the debrief, he said, "Look, I didn't need to worry about my mother because she was so well cared for by that team, that care team that was available to assist critical staff so they could focus on the critical parts of the business and not worry about the rest of their life." And I had a CFO in another business where we arranged childcare because we needed her to
mm,
sign the checks. But she had a young family and she was a single mother. Where was she
mm,
going to be? At your business or worrying about the kids or pulling
mm.
people in too many directions? You really have to pay attention to those kind of details.
Yeah, and I think to round that out, I talk about using your business continuity planning process to not just find what is critical, but to find what can safely stop. What can safely stop, and those resources can be redeployed because then you have access to resources that you've freed up that you did not have at other times. Now, I'm
Yeah,
sure Chris
that's,
go backwards and
I've
forwards
got this,
talking about these things for hours and
I've got
hours, but
this
I'm
thing called,
conscious of time.
sorry, just a moment. I've got this thing called the funnel model where I actually look at that. So I write the business continuity plans about the less than 7 day MTPDs and particularly the less than 24 hours. But I talk about the staff that are not in that critical space being available to stand up other parts of the business and bring them back, as well as being a surge workforce. So, say for instance, if you've got internal auditors, that may not be considered a time critical business process, but those people are really good in the finance sector, and you can move them across to that, which may be a critical time critical process. So, yes, everybody's got a job, but it might be a slightly different one to the one that you do business as usual.
So thanks for your great insights and expertise, Chris. I think personally I've taken quite a few key points away, but I think one thing that I am definitely going to take away for the rest of the week and ponder on is, have we trained those executive assistants or those log takers? Have we got that at a sufficient level within my organisation? I think that's one tangible thing I'm going to take away. Sherland, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is in the chat. Key point that sticks with me is encouraging actions, lesson learned. A timeline for asset ownership probably built into any procedure that speaks for dealing with lessons learned. A really good point. I think we underestimate both how much time the recovery is going to take and how much effort and energy is going to take to actually embed those lessons. So hopefully everybody found this an interesting and useful chat with Chris. I certainly have enjoyed my time and have learnt a lot from Chris over the years. If this has sparked an interest as something you would like to either host as an Ask the Expert session or be the expert on one of these panels, reach out to us. We're keen to talk to more people and to continue these conversations going. So thank you, Chris, for your time, and hopefully the exercise finds a lot of lessons to be learnt.
Well, I think we're learning lessons before the exercise, which is something that's underdone. I often start writing the exercise report before the exercise because of what we're learning in the preparation too.
Great. Right. Thanks a lot, everyone. Carry on with your days.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Maria. Have a great day, everyone.